Hey everyone, I hope you guys are having a great day. Welcome back to another Web Dev Junkie video. So in this one, I'm going to be walking you through a real life bug that one of my Discord users kind of ran into. He said he spent about 8 hours trying to figure this one out, and I thought I would just kind of show you the thought process of how I typically debug errors that are similar to this, and hopefully showing you my process will help you also become better web developers and better at debugging code, because it is frustrating to spend 8 hours on something super trivial such as this, which I'm going to show you. So if you don't know, this application, I do have a MERN stack tutorial where I built this out using really basic authentication, and you could log in, you can register users, and you can save to-do list items. So one of the features is you can go here and you can type in like hello world, and this is like your to-do list item. And when you click add, it's supposed to do a post request to the backend service, which is running. And in this case, notice that down here on the bottom of the network tab, we got back a error. Okay, so we got a 403 error on this to-do list endpoint. And if you look at it, the preview is saying invalid access. So that's the kind of the information that you get. And we had to pretty much figure out how to debug this and understand how to fix the issue. So the first thing I recommend is find in your front-end React application where the post request is actually being done to the backend, right? So keep that in mind. We're going to look at this code. And then secondly, you want to have the server code kind of open as well, because this is also something that we're interested in looking at. So notice here we have a post endpoint, which does a bunch of logic, and the issue could basically happen in any of this code as well. So that's where I'd first start. I'd first go and look at the code and try to figure out, okay, what's going on? What is potentially going on? Are we hitting the right endpoint? So in this case, we look at the URL, we are hitting the right endpoint, it seems, because this one /todos with a post request maps up to post at /todos. Okay, so that lines up. We should be hitting the right endpoint. Secondly, we are setting some authorization headers. We are setting a body, and this should be working, right? And if you see here on the network tab, it is actually hitting the right endpoint. So if you actually expand this a little bit, you can see here in the request URL, we're hitting the correct endpoint. We get back a 403 forbidden, and we also get back invalid access. So the question is why are we getting a 403? Everything seems to be right. We look at the headers, we see that we have some basic authentication passing in. And we can kind of dive in further to figure that out. So what I would recommend is console logging. Okay, so console log is your best friend. Make sure you console log wherever you can to figure out what's going on, because obviously the endpoint is being hit. But if you want to convince yourself that we are being hit here, I would definitely add a console log here, and I would restart your server. So in this case, I'm going to add nodemon so it kind of restarts for us. All right, so let's just go ahead and try that request again. I will hit that endpoint, and notice that it prints out here, down here in my console. So we know that we're hitting the endpoint. We know that we get here. But now what we want to do is we want to kind of inspect all of these different variables, okay? This is the next step. You could use a debugger. Like, you could probably host this in a debugger. I like using console logs, but what you should probably do at this point is you can see that this statement is returning a 403 error, okay? This says res status of 403. So we can assume we're getting into this if statement, right? So let's just go ahead and print this out. This says, like, you can say hello or whatever, and restart the server. And again, just do another post request to that endpoint. And notice that we are getting a hello statement. Okay, so this is a step in the right direction. We know what path the code is taking. We hit the endpoint. That's working good. But unfortunately, we're getting to this authentication check. I guess you can call it a guard, which is checking the user to make sure the user exists. And it's also making sure that the password matches the user that was found in the database. So there's two things that could happen here. There could be no user in the database, or the passwords could not match up. So what I would do is, before this if statement, we need to figure out why. Why is this not working? So I would totally print out the user, and I would probably print out the password like so. Resave that, and just go ahead and do another submit. So I'm going to go ahead and just do a submit here. And notice that in our console down here, it prints out the user, which has a password of 123456 and a username of Cody. And the password here is undefined. Okay, so that's probably related to the issue. The password should have been set on the authorization header. So that makes me think, okay, let's look at the auth header. Maybe there's something wrong with the auth header. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and print out what authorization is here. So print out authorization. Again, just hit the endpoint and see what happens. So authorization comes back with basic Cody space colon space the password. Okay, so off the bat, since I'm familiar with what an authorization header should look like, there probably shouldn't be spaces in between the colon with the username and the password. Okay, so that is a red flag for me. And I would basically go back to the front end and be like, okay, what's going on in the front end? Why is the front end sending this auth header with spaces in between the username and password? And then also you can go to your network tab down here and go to your auth section. So you go to your headers, request headers, and I can look at the authorization. Notice that it also is set to basic space Cody space colon space the password, which again, this is not formatted the way that the code expects, right? The code expects it to split on the token, and it doesn't expect to be spaces in between them. So this obviously is breaking. More specifically, if I were to print out like more information like token, again, the more you print out, the faster it is to actually figure out what's going on. So we already know password's undefined, but I'll just go ahead and print it out as well. So I'm going to hit the endpoint again and just kind of figure out more information. Notice that token comes back as Cody, username is Cody, and again, password is undefined. So the issue is probably related to some of the split logic, right? And again, we already found the issue. There should not be spaces in between here. And the more experience you get with programming, the more you're going to start looking at your header. So right off the bat, if you get a 403 issue, check to make sure your authorization header is set, and also make sure that it's set correctly. In this case, ours wasn't, okay? So that makes me think, okay, let's go to the front end and let us look at where we're setting the authorization header. So if you go here, line 16, notice that there are spaces in between the username and password, but our backend logic doesn't expect spaces like that. So I would go here and just remove those extra spaces. All right, so after removing the extra spaces, I would just go back to the UI and verify this works. So I'm just going to go ahead and type in like hello world again and click add. And notice that we don't get a 403 error back anymore. So I think that fixed our issue. But again, the main takeaway from this is if you're debugging issues that are related to network requests, you need to kind of look at the both ends of where stuff could go wrong, right? So the UI or the client is going to be making the request. So make sure you double check your headers that you send in. Make sure you double check the payload you're sending in. Make sure you're doing the correct post method. Make sure you're hitting the right endpoint. And after you verified all that stuff, then you want to probably also look at the network tab of your Chrome debugger to make sure that like, hey, is the things that I expect to be in the network request actually in the request? So again, you should probably look at the post request that's hitting the endpoint, look at the headers, look at the payload, which is down here, and then look at your response, get more information. Don't just start looking at code, look at the actual stuff that helps you debug first before you start diving into the code. Now at that point, if you can't find the issue just by looking at what you're sending to your backend, then you might need to take it a step further and start printing more stuff out like I did here. So again, verify that your endpoint is actually getting called. So go to your callback in your Express service, put a console log and make sure that you're actually getting to the code that you expect the code to run, okay? So that's what helps us with that console log of here. We verified that, hey, yes, this code is being invoked. And then we can kind of keep adding on, like print out authorization, make sure it looks like it's supposed to. Print out token, print out username and password. And at some point, you're going to get the information that you need, which is going to help you solve your issue. So I hope this was a good overview of just like my thought process of debugging something like this. It's unfortunate that it took someone 8 hours to find that bug, but the reality of the situation is that you're going to run into bugs that are super, super simple, or they seem trivial from the outside, but at the time you just can't see that you're just missing a semicolon or you have an extra space. And that is the exact case in this situation where he had an extra space around his colon for his auth header, and it basically was crashing on his backend because it didn't know how to process that correctly, right? You look at your request, you see that you're sending a username and password, you get so focused on that should be working, and you kind of cross it off the list, and then you go to your backend and you realize that the password is printing out undefined, and you're just confused for like 8 hours. I hope this thought process helps that person who messaged me in Discord, and I hope it can help other people as well. Just stick with it. When you run into bugs, it's inevitable that you're going to spend a lot of time trying to figure them out. So if you like this video, be sure to give me a thumbs up because it helps my channel grow. Also, leave me a comment below if you've run into an issue like this in the past, which you've spent a lot of time trying to debug. And then, like always, if you're new to this channel, be sure to give me a subscribe and press that bell icon because I'm going to be publishing videos like this in the future that should hopefully help you become a better web developer. All right, thank you so much for watching. Have a good day. Happy coding.